Love to hear the buzz in the room. Welcome, everyone. It's just fabulous to have this room so full of this community. And it's, can you hear me now? Okay, welcome everybody. My name's Ann Kurth. I'm the Dean of the School of Nursing. It is an absolute joy to welcome everyone here to Yale Nursing's 16th Creative Writing Awards. I really want to thank everyone for coming out. There was so much work that goes into this beautiful event, and Linda's going to be thanking people as well, our sponsors and everyone, but really it's about supporting the students. And we love this school. There's numbers we can throw around. I'm very proud to say that we ranked now in the top 5 of schools of nursing in the United States. We're top 10 in the world. And we got through accreditation last week with flying colors. But you know, those are numbers, right? I said numbers, and numbers numb, but stories tell. And that's really what this night is about, the amazing stories of students sharing their experiences in their journey as nurses. We have an amazing author here tonight, Teresa Brown, who has also done that on the national and international stage, talking about that journey. And so you're going to have a beautiful evening. And those of you who are not nurses in the audience, raise your hand. Okay, own it. Someone graciously said to me while we were mingling outside, she said, you know, if you want to know about nurses and about nursing, you come to this event. So I just want to, again, welcome everyone. We're really proud that you're part of our community. There's no one else in our community who's more central to this event and to what we do than Linda Honan, so it's my pleasure.
Settle down. Jesus. All right. Jesus. You people need to get out more. All right. We are honored to welcome Teresa Brown, registered nurse, oncology and hospice clinician, New York Times opinion writer, contributor to CNN and AJN, and former English professor at Tufts University. Her first book, Critical Care, A New Nurse Faces Death, Life, and Everything in Between, is required reading for nursing students in programs around the country. Her second book is titled One Nurse, 12 Hours, 4 Patients' Lives, The Shift, is also a New York Times bestseller. She has been published in JAMA, in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, has been a guest on MSNBC Live and NPR's Fresh Air. It may have taken us 16 years to find the absolutely perfect person to speak with us tonight, a nurse who writes nursing. Her books and her stories eloquently speak to the complexity that she experiences doing clinical work. When I was a doctoral student taking my first class on qualitative research, I learned of something called the phenomenological nod. That's the instinctive reaction that one has when one reads truth. From the simple experience of searching for the ever elusive pillows in a hospital, to the complexity of not just the desire to care for people, but the dedication to caring about people, to the grit and the cojones that are needed to do our work, of the difficulty in perfecting technical skills, the messy, often dirty, swampy lowlife of clinical practice, the ubiquitous nature of alarms and phones, and the gross inefficiency of hospitals, the power plays between doctors and nurses and nurse managers, often disguised as rules, but really may be about being a bully. From no lunches to epic charting, the impact of patient ratios on an actual human level, Time as the enemy of the good. I promise you, if you are a clinician, your head will be nodding all the way through the shift. She speaks truth about nursing being the canary in the coal mine. Teresa observes, she watches, she listens while she nurses. She takes in conversations, the environment, the context, and then she narrates nurses' lives as we struggle with system incompetence as well as our own. Social constraint and breaking power structures, ambition and apathy. She tells our story, she validates our lives, but more than that, she gives us insight. She makes us braver than we think we are. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce you to Teresa Brown, a nurse who writes nursing.
What an incredibly lovely, lovely introduction. Really, thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be here. I keep hearing this is an amazing event, and I feel like, wow, I get to come to it, so and be part of it. So that's very exciting. I'm going to start with my background. When we were taking pictures, someone mentioned that my bio says in a past life, I got a PhD in English, and can I have one of these glasses of water? I'm sorry. Sorry, I hope you're not thirsty. Yeah, right. You can have mine. I only drank a little bit, you know. So someone was saying, in my bio it says in my past life, I got a PhD in English from the University of Chicago and then taught at Tufts for 3 years in their writing program. And the question I always get asked, and it's in fact at the start of my first book, Critical Care, is, you left teaching English for this? Usually said in a hospital setting, we're in the middle of some sort of horrible thing that's happening, and people just can't imagine why anyone would leave a calm, collected classroom to come to the chaos of healthcare and the chaos of sick people, right, and trying to make them better. So I call this the $1 million question, because the implication is always that I would have to give them $1 million to make the same choice. But actually, I've never had any regrets at all. I think the only thing is that I had a slow falling away from academia. My dad, he's retired now, but he was a philosophy professor down in Springfield, Missouri, where I grew up in the heart of the Ozarks. And I just thought he had the coolest job in the world. And first of all, his office building was white marble. And I mean, the whole campus wasn't like that. They must have put so much of their money into this one building, you know. But, it was a state school, right? Got bigger in the 70s. But his building was amazing, and it was white marble, and it had these columns, and I just thought, this is the home of knowledge, right? And then if you're a professor, you go in and you work with students, like all of you, interested, excited, or many of you, I should say, interested, excited students, and you help them learn things and you guide them, and it just seemed so, so, so wonderful to live in the world of ideas and thinking. And so I decided to get a PhD in English, not philosophy. I started teaching at Tufts, and discovered that, lo and behold, my father's dream job was not my dream job, which when you've spent 6 years getting a PhD is a little painful to then say, okay, now what am I gonna be when I grow up? And one lesson to all of you, especially in nursing, you have so many options. And there are some people who, they know what they want to be. Like my husband, he wanted to do physics. He got a PhD in physics. He's a physics professor at University of Pittsburgh. He's the chair of the physics department at University of Pittsburgh. That's been his trajectory. Other people are more like me. You do one thing, well, maybe I'm a little extreme, but you do one thing and then you think, wow, could I do something else? this is the beauty of nursing. There are so many different opportunities, and it's so, so important to know that. I just really want you to keep that in mind. If whatever you're doing isn't working out, there's probably something else you could do in nursing that would also be satisfying. But for me, there's not that many options with a PhD in English, and basically I discovered the world of ideas wasn't quite doing it for me. Then I got pregnant with twins. The pregnancy was planned, not the twin part. And I had midwives who managed that pregnancy. And when the twin girls, they just turned 20. They're sophomores in college. But when they were about 18 months, we had a friend visit who was a nurse. And this is truly one of these moments I will never forget, a true life-changing moment, where we were sitting out in the grass, and it was August, and the sun was coming through, and these two little blonde heads running around in the sun. And I was talking to my friend, and I said, I just thought the midwives had the coolest job in the world. And she looked at me and she said, Teresa, you could do that job. And it had never crossed my mind, ever. There was no one in my family in healthcare. In fact, my dad loved to say that all doctors were quacks. And I had never, ever thought about it, ever. And also, I sort of had this burden of having a PhD, and wow, can you go from having a PhD to being a nurse? And then I did some research, and it turns out you can. So I discovered accelerated nursing programs, and I was sold. Literally within a month, I was taking chemistry. We were living in New Jersey at that time, so I was taking chemistry at Rutgers. Because now I had to go back to school and take all the science classes I had never taken. The truth is that I loved them. I loved the concreteness of it. In graduate school, everything was about jargon that I often didn't understand. I'm not really sure anyone did, but I really loved the concreteness of the liver, Or you do a conversion problem, a dosage, and the answer is 3. I like that, yeah. So that's how I got into nursing. Then we ended up moving to Pittsburgh, and I did Pitt's accelerated program. I'm sure it's not quite as good as Yale's, but I got a great education. And then I started working as a nurse, and I really felt, with no regret, that this sort of more intellectual part of my life, part of my professional life, was done. And that was okay. I had no problems with that. I can still read whatever I want. I can think my thoughts, right? If I get the urge to read a very dense, jargon-filled book that I don't understand, I can do that, even while working as a nurse. But then I had a very, very bad experience as a new nurse, where a patient who was supposed to go home started coughing up blood and essentially died. And she was supposed to go home in a few hours. And I can finally tell this story and not feel sick, which is sort of a testament to how long it takes to process these events. And for the nurses in this room, if you haven't had an experience like this yet, you will have one. You will have someone who you thought was okay who's going to die. And you will suddenly be confronted with the fragility of the human body and the limits of what we're able to do for people. And this will be a make or break moment for you. And you're really gonna have to go and draw on all your training to get through that moment. But you can get through it. But for me at this time, I couldn't move past it. I mean, still able to go to work and live my life, but it was so stuck in my brain. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna write this down. Sort of like the pensieve in Harry Potter, where you pull the memories out. And I thought, I'll feel better if I can put this on paper. And that doesn't work. I mean, it really has taken me many years of telling and retelling this story to come to terms with it. But I really liked what I wrote. And I thought, okay, aim high. I've always wanted something in the New York Times. I'm gonna send this to the New York Times. So I sent it to the magazine, and at that time I had a friend on the editorial staff, and I sent it to him, and I said, hey, can you help me? Do you know anyone at the magazine? And he said, I don't, but this is great, and I hope it's okay. I sent it to the Science Times, the Tuesday section on science and health, and they wrote back to me and said, we're going to take this. And I was, wow, I couldn't believe it. And then it took 6 months for them to publish it. And I was starting to imagine it, that I had gotten this email, and I was just getting ready to email the guy and say, did you really say you were going to publish this? When he emailed me and said, we're finally publishing your piece. And they sent out a photographer who took it's called Perhaps Death Is Proud. You can see it online. He took these incredibly spooky pictures of me through glass, and but it came out, and you know, like everyone, I was hoping my mom would read it, right, and some of my friends, and I was totally unprepared for the huge positive reaction that this piece got. And I started hearing from editors and book agents, and the thing I really took home was people said to me, this is a voice we never hear, the voice of a bedside nurse. And I took that and I really kept it as my mantra and my sense of mission. And I suddenly realized I had this amazing opportunity to, as best I could, be a spokesperson for nursing, but to really tell the truth about nursing. And so I'm so happy that Linda said that's exactly what I do, because that was always my aim. And the contract for my first book, Critical Care, actually came from that article. So I was right person, right place, right time, but also right voice, and a sense of, here comes someone who can maybe fill a vacuum that we weren't even really aware of, because there's so many stories about doctors, right, and doctors writing. And so few stories about nurses writing. Although I have seen a few more nursing memoirs now. Christy Watkins' Language of Kindness just came out. And there's another new book that I'm always getting the title wrong. It's something like How to Care, but it's more artful than that, and I apologize. Molly Case is the author's name. I apologize, I'm not getting it right. But I realized this was an opportunity for me to show, first of all, what nurses really do, right? Not what we do on Grey's Anatomy, you know, which is nothing, basically, you know, or all those doctor shows that they don't even get nursing wrong. They just don't get nursing at all. And when I've been in a position to talk about that, I've told people, you know, could you just have nurses on those shows do the things that nurses actually do? And my personal favorite is when the doctor comes in and he lovingly looks at the IV tubing and, you know, I mean, I remember one time an IV pump wouldn't stop beeping, and so the doctor just turned it off. It's like, what? You can't do that. So there is a vacuum of true stories about what we do, and that's a problem because then people don't know how important nurses are to the quality of care. And if you're not familiar with the work of Linda Aiken at UPenn about staffing, and there's other people too, but Linda's really the most well-known person who's done this. I don't know if voluminously is the right word, but she's produced a lot of research relevant to this, is that if you look at nurses being staffed to a certain level, every time that number goes down, patients who wouldn't have died in the hospital will die. You know, this is on a statistical level, a big level, right? We're not talking about 10 people, although it could be 10 people depending on what's going on in any particular floor. All of you need to know that. I know a lot of you are pursuing graduate degrees and you'll be doing graduate work, but you still need to be aware of how integral nurses are to not just quality of care, but patient survival, right? This is really, really important. And so that's what I started doing. Let's show what nurses really do. And so at that time I was writing a lot for the Well blog for the New York Times, and stories about when a patient dies, or how do you deal with all the grief that we have in oncology. And a lot of columns that ended up being about relationships with patients, but also each other, nurse-to-nurse bullying, a horrible, ugly topic that still needs to be talked about because it still happens. And then I slowly switched over to writing opinion columns. My first one was about staffing. And I realized I was reflecting on this. There's that word reflecting, right? I was reflecting on this, thinking about this talk, and I realized that my mission has somewhat not changed, but let's say broadened out to include the idea that nurses are experts. And I hadn't thought about that, but it's really true. I mean, I wrote a column about why do all drugs have two names? And and how confusing that is. And since I've been working in home hospice, it's very confusing to patients. It's very confusing to patients. It's sort of scarily confusing to patients, actually. I wrote another column about why can't we have a single med list for every patient? And this came up because, again, in hospice, people get discharged, the meds they have in their brown paper bag, the meds that are on their list from the hospital, the meds they got from their 3, 4, 5 different doctor's offices, none of them agree, and the patient isn't even sure what they're supposed to be taking. This is a problem, right? So preview, next weekend, I got bumped for the Mueller report, but I should, it's true. I should unless there's another big political bombshell, have a column in the Times talking about how we make decisions about whether patients are appropriate for comfort care or not. And none of those columns are specifically about what nurses do, right? But they draw on my experience as a nurse, and I'm a nurse writing them. Like, that's the thing, right? I'm a nurse. I mean, it's funny, when I started writing, there were some people who's like, is she real? I don't believe she's a nurse. She's not really a nurse. This sort of prejudicial idea that you couldn't have a nurse who could really write about healthcare, who could really think about healthcare. And I always want to say, guess what? There's a lot of nurses who can think and write about healthcare. And I know that some of them are sitting in this room tonight. So we as a profession, I see, are becoming more visible. This is my hopeful interpretation. There's international nursing movements. However you feel about unions, they're, in my view, doing some good work trying to highlight the importance of staffing, which is a really critical issue. There's also non-union organizations trying to talk about staffing. I feel like it's just sort of there in the air, the sense that what nurses do and the importance of nursing is being seen more. People are acknowledging it more. And I really feel the most hopeful about this when I meet with new interns and residents, which occasionally comes up because I'll do something at Pitt. Actually, I also gave a medical grand rounds. And I can tell you the story about the doctor who like 5 times said, "You're giving the medical grand rounds." And I kept saying, "Yeah, I'm giving the medical grand rounds." Anyway, I guess he thought I should only be in the nursing grand rounds. But anyway, I do feel very hopeful when I meet interns and residents and fellows who do see nurses as colleagues and really want to have a good relationship with the nurses on their floor, and are very much like, call me by my first name, and I think they just are more informal than perhaps the generation before them, but also they have a better understanding of sort of the intricacies of all the interlocking parts of healthcare. And I always say that nurses don't really learn much about doctors, doctors don't really learn much about nurses. Then you put these two groups together, and we are supposed to be together the instrument of how healthcare happens in the hospital and in home care. So for the sickest patients, you have these two groups of people who don't know anything about each other, suddenly having to very intensely work together. It should not be a surprise that this leads to problems. But what each of us can do about this, and this is the mission that I'm going to pass on to all of you. I know that a lot of you write. I know that you're good at it. There's probably some of you who don't write and hate writing, and that's okay. Because the real job of nurses who are leaders, and everyone can be a leader, whatever job you're in, remember that also. But the real job of nurses who are leaders is not just to be great at your clinical work, but I would say, as much as you can, do this same mission that I've embraced for myself. What can you teach the world about what nurses do? What can you teach your family about what you actually do every day? What can you teach the physicians you work with about how important your role is? And all these things may sound very, very basic, but that's where I started. That's what I started with that impulse. And Linda said, it took us 16 years to find the right person to be the speaker here, which is not necessarily true. But the point is that that's a powerful motivation for me, and it can equally be a powerful motivation for all of you, right? So I want to leave you with that charge. We have so many stories by doctors, and some of them are beautiful, and some of them are very helpful, and some of them have pointed out serious problems. And the problem isn't the doctor narrative, right? The problem is that we don't have our voice out there also. We don't have a seat at that storytelling table. So I'm going to borrow from Shirley Chisholm. I just found out this great quotation that she said, if you don't have a seat at the table, everyone knows who Shirley Chisholm was? If you don't, you can Google her, right? So she said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. So I'm going to tell you, if you feel like you don't have a space for your story, find a space, keep writing, bring your laptop, get to work, and congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our distinguished guests for taking the time out of your busy life to support the Creative Writing Award. Writ large, the function of narrative or story is to connect to the reader. The connection is joined not so much with the intellect of the reader, but to a sense of, if not shared, at least appreciated lived experience. That takes the form of feeling. That is why story is often considered controversial. Feeling, except in psychiatry, is not to be mined in scholarship or science. It needs to be covered up by method, by statistics, by objectivity. But story is subjective. It gives us insight into the world of nursing and the gifts our students give the world. And tonight is about giving voice to our students. What originated as an assignment where students were asked to journal about the process of becoming a nurse or living the life of a nurse culminated in this event. We learned to write what and how we think, to unearth lessons, to preserve moments, to discern both the complexities of our experiences and often the systemic factors that are associated with them. That's why we write. But to move them beyond the personal to the public offers opportunities to see our profession in real and accessible ways. And tonight, we are celebrating 16 years of Yale nurses writing nursing. We received 96 submissions for tonight's award. And with a great deal of difficulty, the original submissions were narrowed to 16 by Nina Adams, Dr. Deborah Foss, Dr. Lawrence Gutterman, Dawn Hubbard, Katie Pellico, Mary Pearson, and Shel Swanson. The final submissions were whisked away to our 4 distinguished judges: Echo Heron, critical care nurse and New York Times best-selling author of 9 books; Ann Fadiman, award-winning author, essayist, editor, and teacher; Anna Quinlan, Pulitzer Prize-winning author; and Lee Woodworth, author of 3 best-selling books. Those top writers are Sebastian Beschk, Marian Blowy, Ray Caliendo, Harley Chung, Lauren Eddy, Jess Harris, Sylvia Kang, Elizabeth Renker, Janessa Payano Stark, Nikki Schachman, Naomi Schwartz, and Sarah Van Buren. In addition, we saluted an additional 20 students. I would like to acknowledge all of those students' efforts and let you know that you have a small gift, and that is the top 29 submissions to tonight's contest are compiled in a chapbook for you to take home. The 3 winners tonight will receive a citation and a check for $1,000. And of course, the honor of reading before this distinguished group. Finally, before I introduce you to the students, I want to acknowledge that tonight would not have happened without the support and the generosity of sponsors. Leslie Mills of the Griswold Special Care, we'd like to thank her for her generosity and created an endowed fund to support this award. Beth Beckman, Chief Nursing Executive for Yale New Haven Health System, and Ina Williams, Senior Vice President and Chief Nursing Executive for Yale New Haven Hospital, were platinum level sponsors this year. In addition, additional sponsors included Judy Krause, former dean and head of Silliman College; Kimberly M. Goff Cruz, Office of the Secretary and Vice President of Student Life and the Charles Gallaudet Trumbull Lectureship; Cassie and John Picard; John H. Driscoll and the Webster Private Bank; Walters Kluwers, Nursing Education; Linda Schwartz, Ed Cleary, the Gustafson family, and Dean Ann Kurth, along with thank yous to Deborah Foss, Holly Kennedy, and Carol Ann Wetmore. And finally, an event like this equals increased work for countless people that is often completely unrelated to their job descriptions. From Neil Green, who photographed our winners, I feel like I should scream Neil right now. Yeah. To Neve Emerson, who edited all documents and aided in securing sponsorship. To Charlene Paradis, who manned the online registration system and all the tick lists for the past month. Tracy Chitsey, also known as my right hand. She edited every document and was a livery service for flowers and chapbooks. Lauren Langford, who created our invitation and tonight's program, and our administrative team of Nancy DiMatteo, Jeanette C. Prats, Christina Kinzerski, and Colleen Colbert, who tallied returned phone calls, deposited checks, looked up home addresses, orchestrated, printed, helped budget, and managed to make tonight a success. So thank you all. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our top 3 writers. Our first reader will be Diana Kemp. Diana is a women's health and midwifery student. Yes.
Not like me at all.
Yeah.
I'm not going to interrupt. You've done a wonderful, incredible list of those who supported us. But we need to thank you.
Oh. Anybody else? I'll take your money next year. Yeah. Diane is a women's health and midwifery student. Her favorite parts of Yale include the Yale University Art Gallery, the Wyndham Campbell Festival, and her inspiring Yale School of Nursing classmates. After graduating from UC Davis in 2013 with a BA in International Relationships and Italian, she worked in public health and she joined the Peace Corps. Her time working in Cameroon showed that she wanted to spend her life working with women. Since moving to New Haven, she has volunteered with the Haven Free Clinic, Planned Parenthood, and the Yale Patient Navigation Program, and she plans to pursue a career in global health. Diane?
Oh my God. All right. Hello. So my name is Diane, and this piece is pretty much dedicated to all of the students and teachers of anatomy, and I wrote it about my time training to be a TA for this year's class. I have seen the human body do incredible things, and as a midwifery student, it is no surprise to others that I would say the greatest thing I witnessed is the body's ability to bring new life into the world. But just as remarkable than this is the body in death, and I know this as a student of anatomy who has had the privilege of examining and marveling at the intricacies of the human body inside and out. So, how do I love the anatomy? Let me count the ways. Lifting the bowels out of the abdominal cavity and never quite being able to have them lie exactly as they were. Snipping away at the great cardiac vessels in order to liberate the heart and cradle it between our hands. Tracing the indentation of the aorta along the surface of the left lung. An eye, a window to the soul, the size of a cherry between my fingers. The surprising toughness of the sclera and the oozing of the aqueous humor. And just when you thought you could name all of the structures in view, there are hundreds more waiting for you to say their names and to give them life. I have to say, nothing quite triggers an existential crisis like spending time amongst the dead in an anatomy lab. Before us were bodies who had lived and loved and were still dear to those they had left behind, still displaying a hint of life. Their faces are covered with linen shrouds that I don't have the courage to remove until a few days later, when they are more an array of organs than bodies. I walk out of the first day of lab into the afternoon sun, confronted with the realization that I could devote myself to anatomy for the rest of my life, and I would still never unlock all the secrets of the human body. And all of a sudden, I can't help but feel tiny and small. But by the third day, my philosophical quandary is resolved, and it's business as usual. My musings are more about things like whether I'm going to be a vegetarian after this experience, and I know that I won't. By the last day, this body and I are the best of friends. I know her. I know right where I tucked away her foot so that I could reveal her dorsalis pedis the next morning. We use a bone saw to remove a leg in order to get a mid-sagittal view of the pelvis. As my classmates continue with their work, I quietly settle into mine, discovering the vasculature of this lower extremity that has been removed from its owner. Layer by layer, I move through skin, fat, and muscle, and eventually uncover the beginnings of the popliteal artery in its pearly and springy beauty. My gloves are greasy from working with adipose tissue. I am careful as I trace the winding path of the vasculature down her calf, lest I nick a vessel and spoil blood onto this beautiful view. The work is so calming, so therapeutic, that my usual inner monologue now just sounds like elevator music. I find joy in the slow and methodical work and think to myself that this must be why people find joy in things like cross-stitching, but I think that this is much better. I am brought back to the surface by the sound of the electrical saw and the smell of bone dust. I step up on a stool to get a better look at what is happening at the other end of the table, and I see that my classmates have progressed to removing the top of her skull. As I lean over her body, I realize I am cradling her hand in mine in an odd gesture of intimacy. I squeeze it harder, and I hope that she finds comfort in knowing that there are students patiently vying for their chance to hold the saw, to lift the cranial cap, to discover the contents of her skull, like opening a box on Christmas Day. Surely she knew that this would happen, just like the donor with the words, "Go Harvard," tattooed where the sun doesn't shine. He definitely knew, this really happened. He definitely knew, and I hope it brought him as much joy as it did to us when we saw it. This body will be turned into ashes once we have learned what we could, but the experience will stay with me forever. We may all just be beings fighting for relevance in a place in this world, and our knowledge may disappear with us, but each day I will strive to know just a little bit more than I did the day before. Thank you.
Our second reader will be Camila Soto Espinoza. Camilla is an international first-year Gepin student. Her chosen specialty is midwifery women's health with a concentration in global health. She graduated from the University of Concepcion, Chile in 2015 as a midwife and a child care specialist, and worked for 2 years in public hospitals caring for the vulnerable, at-risk communities in Chile. Her experience working with immigrant patients in Chile strengthened her long-term commitment to become a midwife of the world and provide inclusive, patient-centered care to Hispanic communities in English-speaking countries and underserved communities around the globe. Camilla?
My biggest achievement of the night is climbing that stair without falling with heels. Yes, my name is Camila. I want you all to know that I'm doing this in my second language. That's why I'm really nervous. Hopefully, we'll have a good time. In my blood, I carry the legacy of the heroes that shaped me, the nurturing woman from whom I inherited the golden heart that future nurses are born with. Yet, I don't come from a family of nurses. Their calling, unlike mine, went unanswered. The circumstances of their birth and upbringing ensured they would be denied the chance and the opportunities. Born in poverty and raised amidst violence, they were hobbled with virtual chains affixed to their ankles, unable to move freely beyond the blocks of a small, poor neighborhood in a city in the north of Chile. But they refused to let hostility touch us. The men that forcefully turned them into women before they reached puberty did not get to lay a hand on us. All their nurturing and healing potential was placed solemnly on trying to ensure we would become what they couldn't. A meal that ought to serve 4 magically fed 10 so no child would go to bed hungry, even if it meant they themselves would have to. The single pair of school shoes they could afford was shared and passed down so no child would be denied the education they were deprived of. In the midst of despair, they gathered together and created the village it took to raise us all. We did have it better. Frequent and loud laughter is a part of all our childhood memories, but the omnipotent presence of a macho culture was out there, waiting to break us once we left the nest they so lovingly created. We, the girls that became women, were also abused too soon, Red and purple marks blossom in our skins, and the echo of recent screams became the soundtrack of at least one chapter in our lives. But we didn't let that define us. And the pull of nurturing professions went on as generation after generation had at least one woman who tried, but for some reason or another, succumbed to the circumstances that scarred their bodies and broke their resolve. Yet each one pushed a little further than one before her, and it was their footsteps that I started to follow once their calling made me thrust forward with the urgency of destiny. The beginning was easy. They had cleared the path as they ventured onto it. It wasn't until I made it further than any other women in my bloodline that the challenge really began. But there they were, to uplift me and encourage me during the journey. Their breaths caught with the collective longing for a letter of acceptance. Their tears of joy run as freely as mine when it finally arrived. Their anguish joined my own when the cost of the challenge turned out to me more than I could ever afford. And they used every resource at their disposal to make sure that money wouldn't keep me from trying. It was because of them that I became the first woman in my family to hold a college degree and the first to leave the nest and become an immigrant with a mission to serve the seekers and the dreamers that had arrived at these foreign lands, just like me. My successes were the product of a team's effort, and even after giving me everything, they still had one more gift before my departure. In the middle of our last family reunion, they sat me down, and in my hands placed years of collective wisdom, of stories of personal wars and times of peace, until my commitment was sealed with fire, and I was thoroughly reminded of who I would serve. Women like them, women like me, women like us. Your duty is to help, they told me, to nurture, to care, to bring health when health can be restored, and to tend to strangers when health has been lost and death is near and waiting, sometimes patiently, sometimes not so much. Your duty is to protect from judgment, from harm, especially your own. Take off your beliefs and your morals before you put on your white coat. You will fail your patients if you ever let that taint a medical assessment. Look at your patients, greet them with kindness, even when they are anything but kind. Pain has given them no rest, and by the time they come to you, they are already exhausted from suffering. You will never be able to understand what it truly means to walk a day in their shoes, but you should always try. Society has stolen the voice of many, and it will be your privilege and your responsibility to advocate for them until they get it back. No person chooses poverty when they have any other choice. When resources are scarce, it's hard to see the urgency of a future beyond tomorrow. You'll want to scream in frustration as your recommendations fall onto what seems to be deaf ears and indifferent hearts. But forgive them, forgive us. We have made the same mistakes and have been labeled non-compliant with treatment. But prevention is hard when putting food on the table is the daily struggle that overshadows all your waking hours. Treatment is even harder when you have to choose between the medication that could save your life and the school supplies your child needs to keep chasing a better tomorrow. Be grateful. Hundreds of strangers will place their trust in you, open their hearts and confess sins they have not even dared to admit to their gods. Protect their trust and they'll show you their scars. Ask the right questions and their sorrows will come pouring out. But use anything they share as a weapon to elicit guilt and false compliance, and you'll lose that bridge to their souls forever. Honor your degree. You are one of the lucky few who has been given the gift of knowledge and the language to understand it. Be humble, use it wisely, share it freely. Understand that your mistakes weigh more heavily than those committed by anyone who chose a different path. That is the burden of holding life in your hands. But as the never-ending mystery that humanity reveals as it unfolds, you'll come to understand that mistakes are inevitable tragedies of our flawed and beautiful existence, and you'll have to learn to ask for forgiveness and forgive yourself in the rare occasions that you make them. Eat, sleep, and stay in touch. You have been called into nursing, and this is as much a curse as it is a blessing. You will forsake your own well-being for the sake of becoming the nurse you aspire to be. You will lose birthdays, funeral dates, and in the process, loved ones who are unable to understand why you choose to care for and console strangers in the most important moments of their lives at the expense of doing the same for your own people. That is the inevitable price to pay, trying to squeeze whatever living you can do in the breaks between one shift and the next, and accepting the loss of those who are unable to understand it. It will be hard, impossible at times, they concluded, but rest assured, my dear, the sacrifice is worth it, because this golden heart we gave you wouldn't beat as hard and as passionately if you were doing anything else. I am here today representing more people than just myself. With my life, I have promised to build them an altar. Every grueling shift and every sleepless night of studying I have laid as offerings at their feet, because I would be nothing without my heroes, the best nurses the world never got to know, the women of my family. Thank you.
Our final reader will be Cale Wardell. Cale graduated Phi Beta Kappa in psychology, neuroscience from Colby College in 2013. At Colby, she played varsity field hockey. Which is hard to believe when you see the size of her if you don't know her. She studied art and literature at St. Petersburg, Russia. She served as the president of the student health on campus, and after graduation, Cale worked in psychiatric research at Northwestern and at Boston universities, where she discovered she would rather work directly with patients instead of analyzing data from behind a computer screen in a cubicle. In Chicago, she left her best friend, Henry, but is eternally grateful for his unwavering support. Cale is in her first specialty year and will graduate as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. Cale?
I made sure I wore heels so I could see above the podium. So my piece is called A Small White Card. What does it mean to be a nurse? I did not know. Hidden in my wallet, there was a small white card issued from the state of Connecticut with 6 numbers on it. Those 6 numbers held the power to declare me a licensed registered nurse. I thought if I stared at the words on this card long enough, maybe I would feel like the person it declared me to be. Yet I knew that I kept this tattered piece of paper with me at all times as a subconscious and perilous attempt to quell an inner voice that told me I was not a real nurse. By December 3rd, I had fully accepted that I would probably never feel like a real nurse, and that now faded card, still carefully guarded in my wallet, felt more like a mere formality on the path to graduation. That cold December morning had begun with an ungodly early alarm, a train ride to Chicago O'Hare's International Airport, and a disappointing middle seat assignment. As I sat squished between 2 strangers, I began to read my neuroscience textbook. The chapter for the next day's class was on sleep, something I desperately needed. And it felt like the book was almost mocking me. As I read about sleep stages and neurotransmitters, my head fell rhythmically and I nodded off. I was abruptly awoken by an announcement over the plane's intercom system. A panicked voice asked if any licensed healthcare professionals were on board the plane. I felt a rush of fear fill my entire body as I listened to the words. Surely there would be a doctor or a real nurse on board. Seconds dragged by, and suddenly time seemed to stand still. No one had come forth. A second announcement was made. If there are any licensed healthcare professionals on board, please press the call button. I knew I had a choice. I could cowardly hide in my middle seat, and no one would know about that tattered white card in my wallet. Or I could put aside my self-doubt and rise to a much greater calling. In that moment, I did not know if what I had to offer was enough, but I did know that I came to Yale in order to fulfill a lifelong desire to help others. And that was why I pushed the button. As the call button lit up above my seat, dozens of curious, apprehensive eyes made contact with mine. A final announcement was made. Could the healthcare professional please report to the front of the plane? I stood up and made my way down the aisle from the second to last row. Heads turned and my face grew warm as I felt hundreds of glares sizing up my 5-foot frame walking to the front of the aircraft. My mind raced with scenarios with which I might face when I reached the end of the seemingly endless aisle. I rehearsed the acronym MONA. As I desperately tried to recall other medical surgical knowledge that I had ground into my head that past year. As the front of the plane neared, I heard cries of pain coming from a flight attendant sprawled across the jump seat, holding a blood-soaked napkin over her left eye. The same panicked voice I had heard over the loudspeaker explained to me that as we were preparing for takeoff, Brianna had opened an overhead bin and a free-floating laptop had hit her directly in the eye. His voice began to quiver as he explained that Brianna had corneal implants and the implant must have dislodged, the impact must have dislodged the implant. I think he sensed the confusion on my face because he handed me medical gloves and said, "Just go look at it and please tell us what we should do." I turned my attention to Brianna as I introduced myself. My name is Kale Wardell, and I am a nurse. Even the words felt foreign and uncomfortable as I uttered them. However, the eerily silent plane and Brianna's pained whimpers left no space for self-doubt or hesitation. I began to feel a strange rush of energy and an instinct I did not even know existed begin to take over. With a sense of authority, words came out of my mouth. Call 911 and taxi back to the gate immediately. I peeled back the napkin she clutched over her eye as thoughts of incompetence were replaced by adrenaline-fueled deliberation and focus. With each panicked exhalation, her ruptured implant oozed further out of her eyeball. I heard a faint cough behind me that morphed in the sound of uncontrolled retching. As I peered to my right, I saw a first-class passenger vomit into a white paper bag. I turned my focus back on Brianna. The cut over her orbital bone was pouring blood. Before I was even cognizant of my plan, I said, "Brianna, we're gonna get through this. I will be here for you the whole time. I just need you to keep your head as still as possible and take deep breaths." I reached for the gauze pads from the first aid kit that had been placed at my feet and took hold of Brianna's face with both hands. I needed to stabilize her head. With each small movement, the implant became more dislodged. With the other hand, I began applying pressure on the wound to the left of her eye. The gauze pads changed from a white to a bright red in seconds. Medical knowledge rattled in my head as I tried to sift through facts and bring them to the front of my mind. I took my left hand off of her head and checked her pulse. 120. Okay, good, I thought. Facts flooded my mind. The head is extremely vascular and bleeds more than abrasions to the other parts of the body. I began to regain a sense of mental clarity as I trusted an unfamiliar intuition. With slightly more assurance in my voice, I explained to her that I wanted to check the vision in her other eye. I gently peeled apart her right eyelid. Everything looked intact. "Can you see me?" I asked. I could feel her head nod in an affirmative gesture. "What do you think is going to happen to me? Am I going to lose my eye?" Brianna asked desperately. The compression had stabilized the bleeding from the eye abrasion, yet I knew my most important training was now being called upon. Anyone can compress a wound or check a pulse, but Brianna needed more than pure procedural knowledge. She needed me to hold her pain with her, to comfort and assure her on a deeper level than any words could convey. As I clutched her head with one hand and held her hand with the other, I felt a grip. It was a grip of fear, a grip of trust, a grip between two strangers who needed each other. The paramedics entered the plane. The tension began to ease in my body as I calmly explained what happened and my belief that Brianna needed emergency eye surgery. As Brianna was carted off the plane, I gave her hand a final squeeze of reassurance before I let go. I returned to my seat and looked down to find Brianna's blood still clinging to my shirt. I sat through the rest of the flight in a shaky, stunned silence. Off the flight, a slew of phone calls with proud parents and confused friends didn't help. They didn't quite get it, but I'm not sure I did at that point either. 3 weeks later, I peeled the plastic film of my freshly dry-cleaned white shirt. Pure white. That was the last of the reminders. At this point, not much remained. The vivid flashbacks had ceased, the bloodstains were washed away, and through a heartwarming inbox message, I had learned that 2 surgeries later, even Brianna had recovered. I refolded the shirt and placed it into the drawer and flopped onto my duvet. I scrolled through Netflix. The new episode of my favorite mindless reality TV show had not been released. Probably a sign I should go to bed. I closed my eyes, and before I could contemplate anything of substance, my body was overcome with sleep. I was back to that cold December morning on the tarmac of O'Hare Airport. My call button was illuminated as I heard the announcement for the healthcare professional to present to the front of the plane. Yet I could not move. My body was paralyzed. In sheer panic, I fumbled around for the frayed, familiar edges of that card I prized so dearly. I pulled it out and set it on my tray table. The worn edges were replaced by crisp, pointed corners, and its soiled gray color now gleamed a pure and assertive white. As I read the card, I noticed that the date of issue was now different. It read, Cale Wardell, RN, December 3rd, 2018. I put the card back in my wallet with a sense of pride. I felt the control wash back into my limbs as I stood up and confidently walked down the aisle. This time, I knew what it meant to be a nurse.
I used to say that nurses were secret keepers. We kept our experiences of the most intense, intimate moment in people's lives cloaked to all but other nurses. But tonight you are privileged to hear 3 remarkable nurse writers disclose their story. They are our future, and they are taught at Yale that there is an expectation that they will be leaders, mavericks that will make a difference. We need to challenge ourselves to continue writing about our work. Tonight you heard how the anatomy lab is where our students meet their first patients and fall in love with the complexity, the challenge, and the charity of our donors. That none of us have progressed to where we are alone. Whatever we have built is on the ground that was leveled by those who came before us. Some many generations long ago, for others, they are the first. And finally, the bravery, the grit to enter another's world and simply try to help, knowing that a license will never prepare you for all the challenges that are to come. The dedication to caring about people fuels their boldness. These students are the future of our profession, and they will continue to write about our work as a reminder to all of us here tonight that we are incredibly lucky to have these remarkable people in our profession. So we look forward to seeing you next year as we eagerly anticipate our students' ability to enchant, to inform, and to exclaim that nursing indeed does matter. Thank you very much.